Joseph and his patience. So Joseph is one of my favourite people in the Bible because what he went through in his life. And you'll find him in the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible, and from chapter 37. It's not going to be long. I don't want to stretch it out, but yeah, it's okay. You can hear me from there. Yeah. But I want to ask first, you haven't got to tell me, is what is it that gets you stressed? What is it that gets you stressful? Now, there was an arrow, there was a hand. Well, for some of us, it might be our spouse. I know I wound Fiona up. I said to Fiona and Alicia this morning, because I was reading through this, I said, do you think I'm patient? Straight away, Alicia said no. And Fiona said, because she's known me longer, she said, you're getting better. And I said, so what about, I said to Alicia, what about your mum? She said, yeah, I think she's patient most of the time. Alicia thinks she's patient all of the time. And Abby is over-patient. She's too patient. But this is what it's about, is we've all got things that really snap us, but that's not the patience, really, that we're going to talk about with Joseph. With Joseph, it's a prolonged length of suffering that took place in his life, and yet, whilst going through all that suffering, all the pain and anguish of a certain period of his life, and probably the most important period from the age of 17 up to the age of 30-ish, then it was a difficult time for him. He was finding out who he was in a real strange land. And we'll find out now. So, have you heard the saying, patience is a virtue? Well, I've heard that, and this is how dull I can be. I thought a virtue was one word. But it's not. It's patience is a virtue. And what virtue means is having a high moral of standards. And in Joseph's case, it was having a virtue, a high moral of standards, even whilst going through tribulation, through a real difficult time in his life. He remained a holy man of God. Not easy to do, is it? When your life is in turmoil and everything's pressing in on you, and you have to stay calm, cool, and collective, and reflect God in your life. Joseph did. It was a good quality of his life. So we know that in Galatians 5, it's got a list of the fruits of the Spirit, and I want the first four.
Love, joy,
yeah, and patience. Love, joy. It's a fruit of the God's Spirit for us to live out in our lives. So patience, the Bible says, builds character. Because it means that you're doing something, your whole body is kind of pushing out there, but you're remaining patient. You're remaining in that reflection time, reflecting God. So just to give a little bit of background of Joseph, and it is a very quick background, is that Joseph was a daddy's boy. He was one of 12 kids. There was 11 boys and one girl. And he was, you know when you go into a family and one of them is just a spoiled little brat and you want to kick his head in? We all know him, don't we? You know, and we walk out of the house and the first thing we talk about, if our little kid was mine, I tell you what, I'd wring his neck. And we do, don't we? Because they're not being brought up in the family as we feel they should be brought up. Joseph was like that. He was a daddy's boy. And the other boys, they couldn't stand him. His father, who was Jacob, made Joseph a lovely coat. You probably know Jason Dunham and Donny Osmond and all them, didn't they? My coat of many colours. Well, he had this coat on and he went around flaunting himself, Oh, look at my daddy and daddy. And the brothers couldn't stand him. Well, one day when they were all out shepherding the sheep, Joseph went and they plotted to kill him. But cut the long story short, they decided not to kill him, but they threw him in a pit. And then a lot of people were coming past, and they were traders, and they were on their way to Egypt, and they traded slaves, they traded people. So they decided, well, we'll take his coat off him, we'll get it in some sheep's blood, get some blood on it, We'll send him along with the slaves. He'll become a slave. So we're rid of him at last because he's made our lives a blooming nightmare. And we'll go back and tell our dad that he was killed by a wild bird or a wild animal. And that's what they did. And we find then that Joseph is in Egypt, and at the age of 17 years old, he was sold as a slave to a guy called Potiphar. And he served in Potiphar's house. And Joseph is put in charge of all that Potiphar has. So let me just take a little reading from Genesis 39, because Potiphar was one of the fellas that was in charge. And he ruled over his household. He took care of Pharaoh and a lot of Pharaoh's affairs. And Joseph, at the age of 17, is taken in, and Potiphar sees something in Joseph. And this is what the Bible says. It said, the Lord was with Joseph. Now that's important to get a hold of straight away. The Lord was with Joseph. And Potiphar saw it. Well, how did Potiphar see it? It was because he was remaining patient. These were the times when Joseph would change the most, when he was going through the most difficult times of his life. That's when we change most. That's when we make the most important decisions of our lives, when we are going through trials and tribulation in our life. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar so much, he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. So now he's been sold as a slave, and now in the house of Potiphar, who is serving under Pharaoh, Joseph is given a high position. He's in charge of everybody in the house. But there's someone in the house, there's always one. And this time it's Potiphar's wife. Now, let's go straight on the second reading, because this is what it says about Joseph. Don't forget, he's in between 17 and 18, but he's 17 years old. Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. So I haven't even got to say any more, really. We all know what Potiphar's wife is thinking, don't we? Yeah? Thank you, Carol. That's right, yeah. Right, and Potiphar's wife, this word is important for in a minute, okay? Soon. Potiphar's wife soon began to take note of him and began to look at him lustfully, and she said, "Come and sleep with me." But Joseph wouldn't, and she wouldn't relent. She kept on after him, and after him, and after him. But he kept saying, "No, I cannot sin against God. I cannot do such a terrible thing. I cannot do that to Potiphar, your husband. I will not do it." But there came a time when Joseph was found by himself, by Potiphar's wife, and she made a pass at him. And as he ran away, she gripped an item of his clothing and accused him of rape. Well, Potiphar didn't want to say in front of everybody that he believed, I believe he would have believed Joseph, because he must have known what his wife was like. But she accused him of this rape, and Joseph was thrown into prison by Potiphar. So therefore, there was two things happening. Is Potiphar's name was being saved, and he wasn't shaming himself, being embarrassing himself, and he was also saving the name of his wife. Now, the prison, as we see it, it wasn't like it was today. We see that. Have I got the reading there? I got a reading. You go. 3. Potiphar was furious when he heard this, his wife's story, and how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. That actually does contradict what I just said, doesn't it? What did I just say? I said that I think he knew. I wonder if he did. Doesn't sound like it, does it? It sounds like he believed his wife. So she must have pulled the wool over his eyes, and he threw Joseph into prison in anger. So what I just said was actually wrong. He was angry. He believed his wife and threw him into prison. The prison was in Potiphar's house. It wasn't an outer building as we see it. It was a place explained as a dungeon. And that's where any of Potiphar's prisoners, those that disobeyed, would be thrown. And that's where Joseph was taken. In Genesis 40, verse 1 and 2, there's a chief baker and a butler that's thrown into prison as well. Now, we all know what a baker, what's a baker do? He bakes. That wasn't that, was it? You're the only one that knew. Right. He bakes cakes. And he was the chief baker. He was in charge of the baking. And into prison at the same time was thrown the butler. Now, what's the butler? What does the butler do? Yeah, he serves. He serves. But what the butler's called in the Bible is called the chief cup bearer. And he's called that because he would have the food from the baker and the drink, and he would test them before giving them to Pharaoh. In other words, if there was any poison in there, it would be, I wouldn't like that job, it would be the butler that died. But Pharaoh would not be harmed. No, it's a bit funny, isn't it, that the cake maker or the food maker and the butler are put into prison at the same time. So something's happened. Pharaoh is obviously suspicious for some reason that they're both thrown into prison. And Joseph's in there with them, but he finds favour. Joseph finds favour as well with the guard in the prison. And he puts Joseph in charge of the men. This is what he says. But the Lord was with Joseph in prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favourite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. It's important we see that the Lord was with him. In all the anguish that was going on, the stress that he must have been in, all the pressures, he knew God. He knew that God was with him. I don't want to get into the dreams, but Joseph is known as a dream interpreter as well, because God's given him the gift of interpreting dreams. And the butler and the baker both have a dream. And Joseph interprets the dreams for him. He tells the baker that you're going to hang in 3 days' time. And he tells the butler you're going to be released. And all I asked of you, butler, is to remember me. And the butler said, okay. 3 days later, I think there was something going on outside. Pharaoh was having some kind of investigation, because it's like the Secret Service, isn't it? There was an investigation going on. Pharaoh found out what the truth was, and he got the blame onto the baker. So the baker was hanged. The butler was set free. Joseph had no release date. It wasn't like we get now. 2 years. And I wanted to mention a friend from a while ago. I think I told a couple of this, but this was about 2 years ago when I was in Usk prison. They have a sentence today called IPP. I think I was talking to Kevin about this a couple of weeks ago. And IPP is indefinite prison period. It means no date, you'll be in there until we say. And there was a guy a couple of years ago that was in Usk prison that I was speaking to, and I said, so how long have you been in? He said, since 1977. I said, 1977? What did you do, kill a queen? And he was autistic. And he'd committed a crime. And the judge, in those days, in 1977, autism wasn't really known about like it is today. And the judge said, I'm going to put you into prison until I know what to do with you. And he's still there today. He was in prison with the Cray twins. He knows both the Crays, Ronnie and Reggie Cray. He said, I was friends with Reggie. He liked me. And still there to this day for the crime. Others have come in for the same crime and were released 30 years ago. But he's still in there. Joseph is in a position where he is seeing people come in and out. But all that's happened to him is he's been thrown into prison. He's an IPP. There is no date. And I think that's why he said to the butler, in his wisdom, just remember me. Just remember me. And he did, because Pharaoh has a bad dream. And the butler remembers, who has been reappointed as the cupbearer for Pharaoh, he remembers Joseph. He said, I know somebody that can interpret your dream. He says, who? He says, back 2 years ago. So now we know that Joseph has been in prison for 2 years, but before that, 13 years have gone. Now, the Bible doesn't say how long he was in there. Some people believe that he was only in there for a couple of years, maybe possibly 3, but it doesn't say. But if you work out the timeline from when Potiphar's wife had made a pass at him, and it said soon after Joseph was in the house, 13-year gap. Joseph could possibly have spent 13, 15 years in prison until he was remembered. And in all of that time, in all of that suffering and anguish, he reflected God. It's an amazing story that he did that. Joseph had every reason to complain. He was falsely accused, falsely imprisoned, but he still served. He still chose to serve. And when we're suffering and we're going through difficult times, I know I can be like this. For me, I go into my shell. You know, I want to be alone. I don't want to be around anybody. I start feeling sorry for myself. All my thoughts, just by looking at a couple of faces on a corner, I can sit there thinking, yeah, like the same. I started, it's me. No one's taking care of me. No one's looking after me. It's all about me. Joseph wasn't like that. He put others first, even in the most difficult time. And the best way, actually, to take your mind off of your own big troubles and the anguish of your own life is to help other people in the anguish of their life. And suddenly you start to feel that all of the stuff in your life isn't as bad as what a lot of other people are going through. There's a people going through far worse. Though if we get into self-pity, we feel what we're going through is far worse than anybody. So God speaks through dreams. Right through the Bible, he speaks through the dreams. And you might not know this, or you might. Muslims have a lot of dreams today because that's how God is speaking to them. And that's how they're being converted to Christianity. So you might be going through a tough time today. Well, you're not alone. I think we all go through tough times at times. The great thing about being in a family like this is that when we go through tough times, we help each other. We bear one another's burdens. I think it's in Matthew chapter 11, verse 21, where it says, Jesus is talking, he says, my burden is light. He does not want you to carry your burdens alone. Romans 5:3 says this, we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. For you know that, this is James 1:3, for you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. In other words, Joseph's growth mostly took place through those difficult times in life. When it was hard, when it's easy, I tell you what, you look at somebody who's rich, who's got lots of money.
Like have a car.
Yeah. Someone who has no problems. Give them a problem, goodness me, they don't know how to cope. Because they've never endured in anything. Joseph ended up second in command in Egypt. One person under Pharaoh. One person under Pharaoh. And he was put there, a slave and in prison. God has a plan for our lives. God has a plan for your life. And when you're going through difficult times and struggles, people used to say this to me, and I used to think, are they serious? They used to say, thank God for your struggles. Thank God for you joking me. You know, I want to shoot him and blooming thank him for him. But if you thank God for your struggles and what you're going through, it brings endurance, and your faith grows, and you can use that for the benefit of other people. A tribulation is a cause of great trouble or suffering, but it produces patience. In other words, hard times produce patience. Endurance, the ability to carry on during unpleasant or difficult process or situation without giving up. So how does God develop patience? You're going to go through hard times, because you're not going to get patience without it. And just in closing, and just to try and keep us all awake, I've done it as a Carol, don't feel guilty. I'm the same as well, don't feel embarrassed. I fall asleep. And actually a friend of mine once, who was, I remember Dal, we were in church, he started snoring. Because when someone's speaking, you just go away, it's relaxing, isn't it? You just go away. Yeah, I do it too. Joseph waited 13 years for God to begin the plan of his life. Someone else in the Bible called Abraham waited 25 years. Moses waited 40 years. Jesus waited 30 years. I think I waited 23. This is the closing verse or sentences that I want to leave with you. God used the trials of Joseph, endured to bring about something good. Let me read that again. God used the trials Joseph endured to bring about something good. The saving of many lives, including those of his brothers who had hated him so much. We can learn a lot from the patient endurance of Joseph during the hardships he experienced in Egypt, and trust that God is using all situations for his own good. Because if you don't know, his brothers came to look for food in Egypt because there was none anywhere else, and found their brother in charge. And Joseph turned around and said, what you did, you meant for bad. But God meant it for good. And the closing verse is Romans 8:28, where it says, and we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. So if you're going through a difficult time, God knows. You might feel distant from God. You might feel alone. You might feel that you're out there all by yourself. But I can tell you that if you love God, God is with you. He won't leave you alone. He will sustain you. And you will find that he'll send people onto your path to help you out. If that changes, we'll just walk to the last minute.